Hello. Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We are honored and privileged to unfortunately be in a case to have a panel like this, but once we do have a panel, we feel very privileged to be here to share our thoughts and our views. If anybody wants, please feel free to go get more food throughout. We will not be offended at all. My name is Michelle Biller-Levy. I am a member of the Hebrew Institute. We moved in during COVID, so I feel like I've met most of you here, but maybe not everybody. I currently work as the Associate Director of College Counseling at SAR High School. Before that, I was the Director of College Guidance at Frisch, and then worked at Flatbush and worked at admissions at Barnard before that. So have a bunch of perspectives that I'm happy to share. I'm gonna moderate here, but really I think our speakers have so much to contribute and say that I doubt I'll have much to do in the middle of this, but we have many viewpoints. I think the point of bringing this together is that there are so many sources in all of our lives and universes right now where we are all hearing about what is going on these college campuses. And so sometimes, like so many other things, right, the media has some very specific takes depending on what your sources are. And so we also obviously, right, have subjective viewpoints on this and want to be able to share those things, but want to also be able to keep you all informed of sort of the broader perspective. But actually the point of this is to bring you down to the smaller, more personalized perspective. Specifically we're very grateful for the college students who woke up early, so they say. Feel free to reload your coffee, who are here, but to really hear the on the ground perspective, right? I think for so many years, like as a kid, I was always told, like, it's so dangerous in Israel, it's so scary to go there, like people are walking around with guns, and then you're in Israel and you're like, this feels a lot safer than my own neighborhood in New York. And so there's maybe some of that happening here. So we want to be able to really give that like firsthand perspective and then share sort of our knowledge in the broader sense of what we've seen sort of trends over time and what this all looks like. So that's what brings us here today. We hope this will leave you feeling a little bit more informed than you felt before you came in. There will definitely be time for questions and people to converse. I know a lot of you, as I'm looking around, have students currently on college campuses. So for sure have much to contribute to this conversation, and we'd love to hear your views as well. So without further ado, I think we're gonna go down the line here and just have everybody introduce yourselves and say sort of what you're, for the adults in the room, I would say what your relationship is to this issue and what brings you to this panel, what your area of expertise is or where you work and why that's relevant. And then we'll move a little bit more into questions. So we'll start there. Go for it.
Hi, Lawrence Askowitz. I'm actually an investment banker, which seems to have absolutely nothing to do with this topic. I'm also on the board of StandWithUs New York. I'm on the board of Yeshiva University. I've run dozens of events for YU professionals and speak often with the students there. I've also written well over 1,000 articles and made 100 videos about contemporary Zionism and anti-Semitism for the past 12 years. So I've done quite a bit on that, but probably most relevant for this panel, I have a student who lives at YU, learns there in the morning, but is at Hunter, Macaulay Hunter, and he's been on the news at least a dozen times about things that he's experienced in anti-Semitism, so I can bring that perspective to this conversation.
Good morning. My name is Shaya Lerner. I am ADL's Director of Israel Affairs. I've been at ADL for about 12 years or so. A lot of the work that I do focuses on issues related to Israel, but particularly anti-Zionism and trends related to that, both here in the United States and around the world. As well as global anti-Semitism. So I have a lot of statistics and numbers to share with you folks, as well as kind of a organizational perspective about the recent trends that we're seeing, particularly on college campuses.
Okay. Michah Gottlieb. I teach Jewish philosophy at the Skirball Department of Hebrew Judaic Studies at NYU. I've been there for 17 years. I've also been involved with NYU Tel Aviv. NYU has a campus in Tel Aviv. I've been involved with that. And I also have a senior who's looking at college stuff now. So,
my name is Shai Goldberg-Hellman. I go to Brandeis University. I was just elected as the Israel Engagement Coordinator for Hillel. That's about it. Oh, I went to Israel. I did a pre-military program last year.
My name's Yedid Orlov. I go to Binghamton University.
Yeah.
What year are you?
First year.
First year.
I'm Ben Rosen. I'm a freshman at Cornell University. And I am right now the Vice President of Communications at the Center for Jewish Living at Cornell.
I'm Michaela Hirschon. I'm a first year at Muhlenberg College, and I just go to Hillel a lot.
So I will just say, as a college counselor, just to kick this discussion off, and I'm coming to you first, college students, so finish your muppet. Wanted to be able to just share, I think the biggest question that I've got, the biggest two questions that we've gotten as college counselors at Jewish day schools in this process are, first of all, have applications changed? Are people still applying where they were planning to apply? Is everybody sort of overrunning YU and what's happening? And the second one, I think, has really been, what are you saying, right? What are you telling people, right? What's the statement at the beginning of this? Everybody's like, what's the statement that SAR is making on this? And so I think I can sort of quickly answer both of those things before we sort of move forward here. I think the first is that the really easy answer to question number one is that no, applications really haven't changed, which I think surprises some people in some ways. But on the whole, I would say the applications that students put into colleges, to all the schools on this panel and to many others, right? The biggies that we're hearing of that have a lot of anti-Semitism happening on their campuses. A lot of our students had applications into those places, kept them in, got admitted to those places, and are planning to go to those places. And I think a lot of that is thinking about the fact that anti-Semitism is happening in large numbers at schools that have, often at schools, not always, but schools that have large Jewish communities. And so, and our families, like thinking about, I think the biggest thing to take away right now, and this is still happening, right? We don't know what the ending is here, sort of. But I think one of the biggest takeaways I've been just giving to families is the idea that this is a great like inflection moment for all of us to think about what we value about these institutions, why we value those things, why are we seeking them out in the first place, and really like taking a good inside look at that and understanding then as a result what that means for then applying to, continuing to apply to and attend or not these places. But I don't think that we're going to see a huge movement of people suddenly saying, we're abandoning all secular campuses, or we're abandoning all schools that have some anti-Semitism on their campus, which will leave us all with very few choices, unfortunately, in this moment. So I think this is a really good moment for us as a community. It's really nice to see us all here together. And so many of you I know and can say, like, you have young kids or kids who are in high school, in college, beyond that, and are really thinking about this to really question for ourselves why we value these institutions in the first place, which is important to maintain the historical context, which we'll get to momentarily, of sort of Jews on these campuses in general. And thinking about, and this is a personal call to all of us, I think, about finding more places that we can send Orthodox students who can feel comfortable Jewishly there, and sort of expanding that list of where there is this where there's the opposite, the pro-Israel, pro-comfortable, large, supportive Jewish community, and really looking to find more places to do that. So those are just things that are on my mind. But I'm going to turn to the college students. Michaela, if you don't mind getting us started. Can you speak a little bit about your experience, generally about Jewish life at Muhlenberg, and what your experience has been over the past couple of months?
Yeah, of course. Overall, I found the Jewish community at Muhlenberg to be really, really wonderful and welcoming and open and supportive. Sorry, got it. And I mean, at Muhlenberg, it's a small school, but like 30% is Jewish, which is really, really incredible to have that big of a support system, to have people from various sects of Judaism, of Orthodox, of Reform, of all over, conservative. Hillel has been a place where all Jews can come together and have food and eat and pray and be Jewish and talk to one another and communicate with one another. And I think that because of its size, we have been able to be together through this really, really tragic experience. And, you know, when things started getting really bad in Israel, the community at the school overall and the Jewish community at Hillel and at Chabad really did come together, and they made a statement, and they had and they had like places for Jewish kids to come and to talk about how they were feeling, to show their support, to daven, to come together in any way that they felt they wanted to, and I think that they haven't really let up on that, which has been really nice. They haven't forgotten about us. They haven't been pushing us away. And overall, in terms of anti-Semitism, there hasn't been too many that, like, I can't think of anything that was truly awful. There weren't any things where I think Jewish students felt attacked. There haven't been outright acts of anti-Semitism or protests. And it's just been an alarming, but overall positive and reinforcing the Jewish spirit in Jewish students at the end has been really great.
Thank you. And
Well, can you rephrase the question again?
yeah, the
Well,
question is, stand up.
Oh, no.
Maybe stand up, if you can speak to generally to Jewish life on your campus, and then speak specifically over the past couple of weeks, what your experiences have been. Have you felt safe or unsafe, and what has helped you feel both those things?
Well, Cornell's campus has 3 primary Jewish organizations. There's Chabad that mainly operates on Shabbos. There's Hillel that mainly operates on Friday nights. And there's a CJL that's a typically more Orthodox week-round organization that does minyan every day and stuff like that. Campus is around 20% Jewish, so there's definitely a crowd. The Shabbat dinners, both at Hillel and Chabad, will both get probably around 100 students. You can rely on getting a minyan every day of the week at CJL. So it's definitely a strong community in that sense. And since I guess anti-Semitism has really started to rise on campus, I've noticed a lot more strength in all the communities. That numbers have only seemed to go up. People attending the kosher dining hall have become a lot more regular since the beginning. We've gone from having maybe 15 people there at meal times to getting 30 people there. 30 people there at meal times most days. And yeah, so overall, I think the community has gotten a lot stronger since anti-Semitism got worse on campus.
Have you felt physically or emotionally unsafe on campus?
So in terms of that, I think there's definitely been a lot of bad things that have occurred on campus, lots of anti-Semitic threats, stuff like that. We've been in the news a lot more than we want to be over the last few months. But the community, everybody supporting each other. Hillel has become an incredible resource as what's been primarily helping students fight anti-Semitism in the classroom. The university themselves have been very supportive of us. We've gotten multiple visits from the university presidents and vice presidents to kind of ensure that we have their support. A lot of us in the community all have personal relationships with a lot of members of the Cornell Police Department. So we feel a lot of support from the Cornell community and from the Jewish community itself.
Thank you.
Binghamton's been amazing. There's like a bunch of organizations. There's Chabad, Hillel, JLSE, which is like Jewish Leadership Initiative on campus. There's Meor, which comes every now and then, and is also at Cornell sometimes. And is always at Brandeis. And it's been amazing. Like there's a really strong community. Like first Shabbos there, I think there was 700 kids, and that was just freshmen. Second Shabbos, I think we had like over 1,000 in the room that's supposed to have like 250 max. So that was a lot. But a ton of Jews. Like I think it's like over 33% Jewish, really strong community. And after what happened in Israel, there was just like an overall campus-wide feeling of solidarity. And there was initially some like what's it called? What's the Palestine organization?
SJP.
Yeah, thank you. There was some like SJP outcry, and there's like a couple of Jews on their like executive board. So it was a little bit disheartening for a moment to see like a guy with the kippah being like not really into stuff that I'm into. But he was talking, and then I had conversations with some friends of mine that know him that are upperclassmen. They're like, yeah, we don't talk to him anymore. And it was good because it was just like this like united in just like solidarity and goodness. And then you had like, I want to say like 50 people yelling and screaming like Free Palestine and all that stuff. And then you had like 300 kids sitting on the side just like not saying anything because they realized it would be a lot more effective to just be quiet and show up and be present, but not be like causing more like headbutting and yelling and screaming, which was great. I think as time has gone on, it's really become clear that Binghamton as a campus and between like the student administration organizations and the administration of the school itself really does stand with the Jewish community to the point where like, I think 2 nights afterwards, we had like 1,500, maybe more kids joining together as like a solidarity. There was singing and speakers and all that stuff. And the library tower on campus was lit up blue and white, which was amazing. Also the president's Jewish, so that's just fantastic, because then you have him like going to Chabad dinner the next week and being like, we're here. So it's been good, it's been supportive, and you even have like teachers being like, yeah, like if you need an extension, you got it, like no questions asked, which has been amazing.
Thanks.
So I'm gonna take full advantage of the fact that my term doesn't officially start until January. So I'm just gonna talk as Shy for now, but I think that, I mean, it's Brandeis, so similar numbers with 33% Jews, but like, because it's Brandeis, everyone is Jewish. So when you meet somebody and you're talking to them for like 15 minutes, and you're like, yeah, I'm from China, and like, you know, whatever, and you say, hey, you're Jewish, and like, no, but my mom is, right? So that's like everyone on campus pretty much. So that's kind of the vibe that I've got at Brandeis before this all started. And honestly, not too much changed once it did. If anything, I would say personally, I actually kind of like the Binghamton way, it sounds like, a little bit better, because there were some things where there was a vigil for SJP before they got, well, actually technically it was after they got disbanded as a club, but some of the Jewish students went and like took videos, and I think that they could have just kind of sat on the side and said nothing and would have worked a little bit better. But for the most part, it's really just been a large majority in terms of the support and also in terms of the student body for Israel. The police that are on campus are also very much there for the Jewish students, and so that does lead to some tensions with some of the Muslim students and other students feeling less safe, which is not ideal. But Brandeis very much has what it's trying to accomplish, and what it's trying to accomplish is be the school that Jews can be at the way that other students can be at other schools. And it's been doing that kind of since it was founded with the quota system and all that. So although I think that there are places that it could go in terms of making everyone feel safe, in terms of making Jews feel safe, there hasn't really been a moment that I have felt anything other than safe. So that is definitely a good thing. Like Yedid was saying, Ron Leibowitz has been amazing as well. His emails are not always the best, but they definitely are going the right way. And in addition to that, it's like official Brandeis policy that all the teachers kind of have to be very understanding of people who are being affected by this. So anybody who needs an extension on anything actually is pretty much guaranteed any extension for any amount of time on any assignment, which has been very useful. I don't have to submit my papers until the 20th. So that's pretty nice. But yeah, so Brandeis is honestly just very much there for the Jews right now. And you can talk about like how much they're there for everyone else, but they're doing a very good job in terms of making me feel safe. So that's nice.
That's a very important distinction to bring up. That's great. Thank you. Michah, do you want to sort of continue that? Not as NYU, but being in a higher level conversation.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, it's fantastic to hear. I'm, heartened by a lot of what I'm hearing from the students. My experience, actually, I've been at NYU since 17 years, and I never experienced any anti-Semitism. People said, oh, there's, it's very anti-Israel. There's a lot of anti-Semitism at NYU. I'd never experienced it before. This was the first time I did experience it. Students asked me to come, some students in this class I teach, which is about a third Jewish, asked me to come to a silent vigil a few days after October 7th. And it was a non-political vigil. I, said, okay, yeah, I'll come. They were just standing, singing, and someone got up who was not a student, almost certainly, and started saying, profanities, and saying Hitler was right, and that was, to me, was very shocking. And then someone who probably was a student said to this person, yes, it's really about the colonialist, the colonialist Jews. It's terrible. But this student said, but it's not all Jews. And this person said, yes, all Jews. Hitler was right. So that, to me, like, really shook me to see that. This is just steps from my office in Washington Square Park, and really, I found that upsetting. the Jewish students, like everyone kind of ignored him, which I think was a totally appropriate thing. But it still, has an impact. And another thing that happened was, some students have come to speak to me, some of the Jewish students, about their experiences. And again, a lot of the students are, well, I should say a number of the students that I've spoken to are very traumatized. I had an Israeli student who said that she knew someone who was at the Nova Festival and was kidnapped. Another student came to me who said she had 5 friends she knew who were killed. So, there's certainly a lot of the students have been, suffering from people they know, from these personal connections. But this one, and some have come to speak to me about it. But one student came to speak to me and said that, he was upset because he was in his class, and a student came in and said that what Hamas did was justified. And then he said, the professor then said, okay, let's debate this, and so he was saying, well, Hamas stands for, killing Jews, and they've said they've killed Jews anywhere. Are we going to debate whether I don't have a right to be killed? I mean, I have a right not to be killed. It's crazy. And I think especially in the context where if you use the wrong gender pronoun, that's you could get into trouble, and and there's a real sensitivity around this. But somehow I think often it's the idea is that, well, when it comes to Jews, well, it's free speech and it's just an intellectual debate. And I think it's that, as I've been thinking more about this, I think it's that kind of double standard, which is more upsetting. If there really was true free speech and we were really debating every issue, then I think that would be one thing, and say, okay, well, this is free speech. But if it's free speech with regard to Jews, but with other minorities or with other groups, you have to be so sensitive what you say. That feels like there's something wrong there, and it feels, frankly, it's upsetting. Just the addendum with this student was that I saw him a couple of weeks later. I said, oh, how's that class going? And he said, well, I've met with the professor, and actually, he says the professor's a great guy. I says, okay. And I thought that was interesting. He says, and I think that there's a lot of ignorance, even among the professors and the faculty, and they don't, maybe they haven't thought through the implications of what Hamas is actually standing for. So we talk about, there's a huge amount of ignorance among the student body, and there's been various efforts among the administration to address that, to create learning modules in the dorms about the history of the conflict. There's this new Center for Study of Anti-Semitism that's opened due to a big donation that was given. But there's also a lot of ignorance among the faculty, So I think, that's an issue. And it's not, and I think it's really the case that a lot of, people who, are entertaining these views that, really seem anti-Semitic, or expressing these opinions that are really problematic, they're really not aware of all the implications of what they're saying. There's a group that is aware, but there's a lot of people who are just ignorant. They think, yeah, Israel's the colonializers. They're just these brutal people who are bloodthirsty, and they actually don't realize how they're hooking into anti-Semitic stereotypes. And so there's really a lot of education that people need to have to understand these kind of latent biases. And I think that's really, really important to stress.
Thank you. Shaya, can you give us some broader context, I guess, as far as the work that you do with ADL, what you've seen as far as like numbers and statistics, right? We're hearing a lot of like personal on the ground, but can you speak a little bit more broadly to what this moment in history on college campuses means in context of the greater historical narrative?
Sure. So first of all, to echo what Michah said, it's heartening to hear the experiences on college campuses, the positive ones, in part because the data that ADL collects often reflects I think, more complicated situation, but I think it speaks to the fact that every college student's experience is unique, and it shouldn't paint a broad brush based on the statistics that ADL or other organizations release. So in terms of ADL's data, so every year ADL issues something called our audit of anti-Semitic incidents, where we get incidents submitted to us, we verify them, and then release the numbers from that year. So, you know, last year was the highest year that ADL has ever recorded in terms of numbers. It was over 3,000 verified anti-Semitic incidents across the country. We have been, since October 7th, been releasing small batches of numbers every 3 weeks or few weeks or so, to kind of highlight the trends that we're seeing post October 7th. So last week we issued data from 2 months of statistics, so from October 7th through December 7th, and we found that there were a little over 2,000 anti-Semitic incidents in those 2 months alone, which represents a 337% increase in anti-Semitism as compared to the same period in 2022. So very high numbers. It likely means that the statistics that will come out at the end of this year for the entire year will be even higher than the prior year. But for this conversation, most significantly, about a fifth of those incidents were on college campuses. So about 400 anti-Semitic incidents on college campuses, as compared to 33 incidents from the past year. In addition to that, we've also surveyed sentiment on college campuses and found that 73% of Jewish college students and 44% of non-Jewish students have either experienced or witnessed anti-Semitism since the start of the year. Less than half of Jewish students say they felt physically safe on college campuses, and only 44% of Jewish students said that they felt their university was welcoming and supportive of Jewish students, and 39% said that, only 39% said that they felt comfortable with other students knowing they were Jewish. So these data points are very important because our 4 college panelists here had one experience which sort of indicates a more positive Jewish engagement, but there are many other students across the country who don't necessarily have that same experience. I want to also jump at something that Michah touched on in terms of what the universities perhaps are doing versus what they're not doing. So it sounds like NYU is taking very important, significant steps to address the issue, but that's not the case on every college campus. We saw this with the testimony of the 3 university presidents a couple of weeks ago on Capitol Hill, Penn, MIT, and Harvard. And then following the Harvard testimony, David Wolpe, who used to be the rabbi at Temple Sinai and big conservative shul in LA, and is now teaching at Harvard, I think in the divinity school, but was invited to sit on their anti-Semitism task force panel. He resigned very publicly, and in his resignation tweets, he said 2 things which I think are very important. One is that most students at Harvard are just interested in studying, getting good grades, and moving on. They're not very political. And I think that's a general reflection of a lot of the experiences of Jewish students and other students on college campuses. They want to have a college experience. They're not looking to be like in the trenches. But the other thing he said was that the environment, specifically in sort of the academic area, was the term he used was evil. And I think that speaks to a broader problem within academia, which is maybe fueling a lot of what's going on college campuses, that there's a liberal trend right now of whether it's the professor of the student that you mentioned, who's sort of open to this idea of exploring Jewish genocide, but not willing to explore gender roles, for example. There's this kind of trend going on, and I think that is one of the core challenges that universities face at this moment, is that how can they address this issue of a liberal education, which essentially positions Jews as colonizers, as committers of genocide, etc., in an environment that's supposed to be liberal and open-minded and tolerant, and not sort of try to other specific groups of people. So I think that's one of the big challenges that is facing academia now, and we'll see how things, if they change, develop in the next few years and decades.
Thank you. Lawrence, can you share a little bit of your perspective from the research that you've done? And a lot of you have a lot of sort of inroads on this from your own son's experience, but with StandWith, and that you're involved with StandWithUs and sort of all your different lenses. I think specifically, Shaya, you made a great point, and Michah too, about sort of almost the distinctive, but maybe not distinctive, but about these three sort of categories, right? Like it's students themselves and their peers. It's then students and faculty members, and I think that's become more highlighted over the past couple of weeks, right? Faculty and professors, and then the overall institutional leadership and what sort of the responses are from those three groups, and those can feel different, those can feel the same, and so I think that's maybe a distinction you can speak to a bit. So take it away.
Sure. I wrote a lot of notes already from everybody, so thanks for putting me at the end. I'm actually going to start with something that you started off with about, is everyone going to flood to YU? Let me go that before coming over here. So Yeshiva University already has seen a 25% increase in enrollment over the last 3 years. So it's pre-October 7th. This has already been a trend. So if you see stats for next year, apply it against a trend that's already going up. And it's also important to note that 44%, or the majority of those, well, overall it's 25% growth, 44% growth in women. So it's really more women that are starting to apply to Stern and Sims than YU overall. Something to note about that everyone's noticed about, boy, it's sort of different in terms of the ADL statistics versus what the students are. And I have a son who I mentioned who's at Macaulay Hunter, which is a commuter school. So I think it's also important to think about, when you're listening to the students, how they've been a campus environment as opposed to a commuter school. So in a campus environment, you're far away from home. Hearing that there's a great Hillel or Chabad or something like that gives you a chance to find a community that, regardless of whatever's going on outside, you can go ahead and find some people who can go ahead and shield you from stuff that's going on. And something else that was said here is that some students, like Robert Wolpe had mentioned, just want to go to school. They don't want to get engaged and fight the fight. They just want to have a college experience. So if you want to create a bubble, it's not about going to YU to create a bubble. You can create a bubble in Brandeis or Binghamton, anywhere you want. If that's the way you want to live your college experience. Nothing wrong with that. Everyone's going to go ahead and make a decision that they want. With that said, there's indeed real issues at the institutional level, at the professor level, at the student levels that are existing in all of the campuses. It's always existed. It, I think, has become apparent to everybody after October 7th, something so blatant and easy to recognize. How can you not recognize October 7th and Hamas as being evil? And there are people who openly say that. So my, one more thing before I go to my son Gideon, who's at Hunter. There was a comment, I think, Michah, you were saying that when you're seeing a lot of these fights, a lot of people are screaming of free Palestine, people have said nothing. There are different ways of engaging the hatred that's out there. If you're seeing a loud 400 people protest, if you think your voice is going to matter at a riot, no one's going to hear you. You want to sit on the side, that's fine. But I would also caution people that's not an either or. That they're being silent at that moment in a protest, or if you want to have a little counter protest or a small vigil while that's going on, that's one thing. But it doesn't mean that students cannot use their voices in their own form, in their own times, at a different time, in a different place, to administration, to professors, to schools. So I think that as the weeks and months and years go on from here, I do think you're going to see students not just hunker down into their community and say, I just want to go to school. I think you're going to see more and more students who are going to find their venues to go ahead and express their pro-Zionist visions in different ways. My son, Gideon, is, I would say, not a typical kid. He is a fighter by nature. He's very vocal. He likes to take on a fight. So he would go ahead and has gone ahead. Hunter, which I'm sure you've all heard, it historically has been a terribly anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist institution. He has set up a table like this in the lobby of Hunter with the sign that says, come discuss Israel and Palestine with me. And he has had people come in and has had 20 people yelling and screaming at him. And he takes on all of them like one of these chess guys. And he said he doesn't believe he's going to change one opinion of those people that he's talking to, but the hundreds of people who are going past him, who are the 80% who have no idea what's going on, they're going to go ahead and see that there are discussion points over here. So I think there is, all of these facts are true. And I think we're all going to go ahead and watch how this plays out over the next couple of weeks and months. And you got to know your kid and how they are going to be best suited in a different type of environment.
Thank you. I was actually just going to ask what advice you would give to current students, right, and families who are navigating this process. And I think that probably is the biggest point to take away here, right? Like you have to know your child and what they're going to experience here and how they're going to feel about that. So that was very, very well taken, I would say. Just back to the college students for a moment. And then I know some people had already raised their hands with questions, so want to be able to get to those. Do any of you feel that you, in light of the past couple of months, I know all of you just sort of started college, but do any of you feel that as a result of this, you might have made a different choice or looked at the college landscape differently when you were making this decision on where to go? And if you all feel no, you could just like nod, shake your heads, I guess. But if you feel yes, or that there's nuance there, Shaya, you look at yours next. So
Yeah, I mean,
go for it.
interesting. This question, I don't know how much I have to say specifically about that because I didn't know. It sounds a little weird, but I didn't understand how Jewish Brandeis was before I went there. I was like, oh, Brandeis is a school that a lot of Jews go to, and then I got here and I'm listening to the introduction speech by Jeffrey Schulzen and by Ron Leibowitz, and they're talking about how one of the core principles of Brandeis is Jewish values. And I was like, oh, this is not a school that Jews go to. This is a Jewish school. And, then every conversation that I followed with that, where I figured out that literally there is no non-Jew at Brandeis, so I don't know if I would have known to choose somewhere else, but I'm very happy that I've ended up where I am, not because it's safe and I can be, put myself into a bubble, but more so because I've been doing a lot of initiatives now, even before I got elected, and actually now I want to continue that from my position with dialogue and finding people and speaking to them specifically that disagree with me. And I think that Brandeis is actually the perfect place to do that because I feel safe talking to people. I don't think that anyone's going to say, oh, this is the guy who talks about Israel-Palestine and is going to go attack me, because I know that I'm safe on Brandeis campus, and I can find people who are willing to speak to me because they feel like they're being listened to as well. And I think that if I can start a base of people that all kind of have mutual respect for each other, and I mean, what Lawrence was saying about how Gideon doesn't think that he's going to convince anyone, I think that there are definitely different goals that you go into when you have that kind of initiative. So with Gideon's, it's the I want to talk to the 80% of people who don't know what they're talking about and are not the ones that are coming to pick a fight. With me, I'm trying to find a middle ground with anyone who is interested in picking a fight, and not picking a fight, but having a conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think that if I can create a base of people, which I've been doing, that kind of say, oh, he wants to sit down and talk, and he isn't just kind of spewing information from whatever. He has sources, he knows people, he's listening, right? Then I can create people that when they see something on the news, they're going to come to me and say, hey, Shai, like, I know I'm looking at this on the news. What's your perspective? There might be something I'm missing, right? And then if that can start at Brandeis because people feel safe, the hope is that it can continue to other college campuses where people feel less safe, and then it can go from there to the world and things like that. So
that was beautifully said.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think if I could just go back to your original question about would I choose differently. When I was considering colleges, I remember having a conversation with my mom, like, why is Judaism on campus so important? Like, I was so sick of the Jewish bubble going into college. I was like, I don't want anything to do with all of my friends. I'm done. I want out of here. I didn't take a gap year. I was like, I'm done. Get me out. And I remember having this conversation with mom. She's like, you really won't get it until you kind of get there. And then you'll be like, you want those people. You want to know you have a community. You want to know that you have support. And I remember thinking, now that I'm here, and especially after the events on October 7th, being like, I am so glad that I have the community that I have, and that I have a place to be supported. And I don't regret my decision at all, but I know that if this was happening while I was a senior in high school now, I definitely would have looked at the college process and picking a college differently. Maybe not a different school, but I definitely would have looked more into how schools are reacting and responding and what statements they're making and speaking to students and what students are thinking. And I think it's really great to have panels like this and to get lots of different perspectives from different schools, from different educators, from different people about what schools are doing, what students are saying, because that would have definitely informed my decision much more than it did, because this wasn't really the case at the time.
That's incredibly, as a college counselor, I think I'm privy to that conversation constantly, so 10 points for your mom. Right. Yeah, a lot of mom points on that one. I'm gonna take some of them too as a college counselor who says that all the time. But I think that's right? I think some of this is also learning and growing and experiencing life, right? You guys are young. And so I think there's a lot to that as well. And I think some of you, it seems to me like from what you're saying that you guys are people who were naturally going to step into leadership roles anyway, sort of where you are. But I think a lot of students are also feeling this pressure sort of on some of these campuses to be like, I am now this representative by wearing my kippah or my Jewish star, right? Like I am this representative of this whole bigger thing. And I think a lot of what I'm thinking about, and maybe as parents of younger kids, some of you are thinking about this too. And we're discussing this a lot at FAR. Rebecca can speak to this as well as a history teacher there, of like, how are we educating our students, right? I think there's a moment here also of thinking about all the money and value and effort and time that we all put into raising our students with, right, to sending our kids to Jewish day schools, and even not sending our kids to Jewish day schools, but the values that we have in our homes, right? We're all here in this shul building, some affiliation and some value that we put into being observant Jews. And I think there's something about the idea of really thinking and looking twice and checking ourselves and remembering that every bunch of years, it's important to go back and look at our curriculum and look at the way we're teaching Jewish history and teaching modern Israel classes, right? Like, what does that look like? Do you feel like you are prepared? We need our students, I think, to feel prepared to leave high school, knowing the talking points, right? Understanding what SJP is and means, right? Things that wouldn't come up in high school, but are really going to come up in college, right? Colonialism, what is that? Like thinking about those terms. And I think we're really trying, I would say the schools in general, because I'm also in touch with the Jewish day school counselors across the country. A lot of schools are not beginning. This is work we've been doing for a long time, but really checking back in on those things and making sure our students, at least from an informational perspective, feel equipped when they want to engage in those conversations of how to engage in those conversations. So those are all very, very good points. Yes, Michah.
I just wanted to comment on something Shai said. I'm very, very impressed with the maturity of what you said, and I think there's a lot of wisdom with in terms of what you said. And ultimately, engaging this, you can get into and have all the arguments back and forth, and and it kind of this comes into a kind of debating point, right? And the question is, who in a debate, it's usually like who's right and who's wrong, and you're trying to get the other side to submit, and usually that doesn't really accomplish a lot, and I think ultimately move forward, and maybe it's too soon now, but ultimately to move forward in this, people have to be able to kind of open their hearts to hearing about the suffering of the other side. Both sides have to do that. And I think ultimately, if you can kind of connect on a human level, the question of what happens on a policy level, that's something kind of afterwards, but just as a basic ability to just see like the humanity in another person and to see their suffering and to take that in, I think that's like a critical first step if we're going to, move things forward in college campuses to create a real community instead of just having these different groups siloed off, so.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I want to go back to the question about whether or not I would have made a different decision. Because frankly, knowing what I know about what has happened on campus, I would not have made any different decision because I'm very involved with a lot of the activity involving pro-Israel activism on campus. But if I took a step back, if I wasn't so involved and I didn't know quite as much about what the university was doing and I had a bit less of insight on it, I could see why people would be scared. For example, I'm sure most people have heard about, we had an incident a couple weeks ago where somebody made a ton of really, really bad threats against the Jewish community in our community centers on campus. And most of the people who are part of the more tight-knit Orthodox community we were feeling pretty good. We felt supported by a lot of other people in the community, but people who are more outside of the community, maybe people who are Jewish but barely even attend any Hillel services or events, they were very, very scared. I know of many Jews who were refusing to leave their dorms for a couple of days after these events came out. And I think overall, some people with less context can be a lot more scared. So that really goes to how one would make the decision, because knowing what I know, I wouldn't have made the decision. But if I didn't have the insight, it might have been a little bit more different. So I think anybody who's in high school right now, it's super important for this decision to make sure that you're able to talk to somebody who's really involved with the community, because the only place that you're gonna get that insight of what Jewish life and what Israel and Palestine is like on campus is really by only talking to somebody who is very involved with it and has firsthand experience of what's happening on campus.
Can I ask the four of you just a quick question? So you've been talking about your fellow Jewish students. I'm curious, I don't know if this applies to Brandeis necessarily, but has there been allyship or support from non-Jewish students post October 7th? And what has that looked like?
I can take a shot at that. So yeah, I started by talking to Jewish students because it was a lot easier to go in on that route. And my goal was always to kind of try to moderate people and get them to be more willing to speak to each other. And I identified a lot of Jewish students that I saw as not being very moderate. And I could go into a conversation with them and say, hey, I know that you think that, you know, they don't have a right to sit there, but we did that last week, right? And it was a lot easier for me to do that because, you know, if anyone ever said to me like, you know, wow, I can't believe you hate Israel, my response is, you know, how many times have you shot an M16? And like, you know, I kind of have a very good fallback onto, you know, that I don't hate Israel. You know that I support Israel. I have all my family in Israel, right? And so it's a much easier conversation for me to have. But I did move from then to I wanted to talk to people who were not, you know, Jewish. And so I've been doing mostly that actually now. And I think I found that a lot of people are not anti-Israel or anti-Jews. They just are kind of interested in the conflict. And because they're interested, they went and tried to find news sources. And when they went and tried to find news sources, they found news sources, right? And like, you know, if I've read most, if not all of the New York Times articles since October 7th having to do with the conflict. And I balance that with a lot of other things to try to figure out, you know, as much as one can about what is true. But I can imagine that if someone's only reading, you know, Routers or someone's only reading the Times and they know nothing about the conflict beforehand, they're gonna have a certain view. And when I sit and have a conversation with them, right, they might leave the conversation saying, hey, I really didn't know that there was another view. And then, you know, I consider them to be an ally at that point because they're not somebody who's against me. They're somebody who wants to figure out what is true. And I don't think that it's so easy to kind of decide like, oh, everybody's showing up to a Palestinian vigil because they want to support these, you know, citizens that have died, civilians that have died. I don't think that you can automatically say like they are people who are anti-Israel. I think that it's a lot more complicated when you're trying to figure out who's an ally and who's not. And so at Brandeis and in a lot of places, I think that I have found that a lot of people are more willing than you might think to be allies in that way.
Thank you.
Yes.
So, Shai, it's an interesting point about where people are getting the news from. And I think it's critical as we're talking about not just colleges, but the 18 to 24-year-old cohort generally. A TikTok generation, if you would. You know, we're automatically assuming we're talking about the best colleges, so everyone's really focused on intellectual rigor and engagement. The reality is that colleges are a subset of the 18 to 24-year-old world where social media and where the news sources are coming from are critical. And if one only gets news from New York Times and Reuters, you're still, unless you get your news from the Hamas website, the Hezbollah website, the polls that the Palestinians do of themselves, not just the processed news. I'm talking about processed wheat or something like that, whether it's on Fox or MSNBC, that's processed news. If you go to the source of the Hamas charter, I think you're going to go ahead and both for students and all of us learn a lot more. And I think the issue on college campuses is also a subset of a larger issue of where 18 to 24-year-olds get their news. And it's you can say it's ignorance, but it's not ignorance. They're getting information. They're just getting bad information or very biased information.
Go for it. Thank you. I will just say anytime anybody uses the term best colleges, I have to, the college counselor in me has to say, like, not best colleges, right? Like, I think a lot of the highly selective institutions we've heard this happen on, but this really is running the gamut. I was on a Hillel a while back already, well, a couple of weeks ago. This feels like it's been forever, but it hasn't. But a Zoom, and the student that they brought on as representative to speak about her experience as a Jewish student on campus was from Georgia Tech, where I've never had it in the 3 yeshivas I worked where we've never had an applicant to that school, but there is a Jewish community there and it's a great school, correct. But I think thinking about like it almost, and this brings up, right, comes back to the first point that I was making of like this real inflection point of why are we seeking some of these schools as a community, right? Thinking about this idea of, right, highly selective best colleges, but this idea of like, where are the schools where our students will feel good, right? Supported and challenged. That's a conversation I've been having for 10 years, right? We're here as a student with your family to talk about college counseling, and we're looking to find a school that feels like the best fit and a place that you will feel comfortable and challenged in all the right ways. And this is another way that's becoming very much highlighted, unfortunately, in some ways right now. But I think thinking about the value system that we ascribe to this place, right? If we are seeking some highly selective big name institutions because they're highly selective and have a big name, this is a real moment to rethink that. If they, for the first time, had the first parent who was spoken to was just over this weekend, the first parent who had said to me, this has been a really good thing that happened for me mentally as a parent in this process, because I was chasing after this for the name, and I owned that and knew that, and now I'm over it. Right? I want my kid to go where it feels good for them. And I'm right. And this no longer is a place that I feel like I need to covet. And there's much more to unpack about that conversation that I'm happy to do offline, in my college counseling, wear my college counseling hat. But I think the idea of having thought, we think back to the history of the institutions, thinking that you were going to these places because they're so selective or have such a brand name or look so good on a sweatshirt or produce very successful alums, but that happens from a lot of places. But thinking about that and realizing that a lot of the selectivity actually comes from the quotas they had to keep Jews out in the first place. So to think that these are places that you're going to go and find some universal truth or some real like supportive of you, right? That they're really here for you. Like, we have to remember what these colleges, campuses are and what they produce. And I think thinking about, if you're going in for this discourse and for all these multiple perspectives, which is so valuable, I hope it's obvious. Like, I believe very strongly in that. That's why I do what I do. We have to remember that conversation is not always going to go the way we want it to go, right? That perspective is not always going to be your perspective. This one feels really personal for all of us. And I think there's a lot of muck to dig through here. And it's so inspiring to hear the fact that you are all right. You didn't necessarily sign up to have to be the muck diggers on this or the leaders on this. And it's really inspiring to hear the ways that you're stepping up to this moment. So thank you, and kudos to all of you. Yes.
One comment, because I've had a nice opportunity to connect with our college students in ways that I hadn't in the past. We've had a number of Zoom and WhatsApps over the course of especially the first month. And so there's this strong representation here of people who had some different campus, but they were okay. And then we had students from Penn and Barnard campus, Barnard Columbia, and Chicago, who had a rougher time, and maybe somewhat settled down to a new norm. Maybe just can't go into a certain building because it's still taken over or something, but otherwise. And so we remind ourselves as well that these guys are having great experience. Other ones are working hard to still be students, but they're struggling a lot more at this time.
Yeah, very good point. Shaya, you have a lot of questions here. If you can
I'll answer all of them.
If you could spell out, well, can you actually, I don't know how much time we have or how specific we can get. I'm sure I'm about to throw you to the wolves here, but anybody can reach out to Shaya separately for the breakdown of statistics. But can you give a little bit more color of like what statistics you're measuring, right? You gave out some sort of significant numbers there, and a little bit to like how you speak to, like, how does this relate? Are these statistics representative of like what, I guess, who are you surveying and who's responding to that? And are you finding there's distinctions between different kinds of colleges, rural schools versus urban schools, as we're hearing a little bit from Lawrence? Like, can you give a little bit more color to some of the statistics, a little bit more context to some of the statistics and where those numbers are coming from?
Sure. So yes and no. What I mean by that is when I talk about incidents, these are incidents that are submitted to ADL. We have online form you can fill out. People call our regional offices. ADL has 25 offices around the country. So they're not necessarily representative of every single anti-Semitic incident that happens, because a lot of people don't necessarily submit incidents. But they are probably the best source of information that we have. There's also the FBI does hate crimes statistics, the NYPD does local statistics, other sort of police and law enforcement department do local statistics, but ADL is national and is considered, I think, to be relatively representative of what's going on in the country. So we get thousands and maybe tens of thousands of incidents submitted every year, and we have to verify them. And there's different ways that we go ahead and do them, but just because somebody says that, somebody yelled, kill the Jews, to them, we don't necessarily take that at face value. We have to verify that. Sometimes there's a video recording, sometimes there are other people who can verify that. And so that's how we kind of arrived at this number that I mentioned, 2,000 anti-Semitic incidents across the country in the last 2 months and 400 on college campuses. In terms of breaking them down, we have found that of those 2,000 incidents, 1,411 were clearly linked to the Israel-Hamas conflict. By that, I mean that they were either at a pro-Israel, anti-Israel rally, or somebody like in Albany a couple of weeks ago shot at a shul and then yelled "Free Palestine" in the course of that. So that has that linkage. If we want to get even further kind of granular in terms of the numbers, so of those 2,000 incidents, 40 incidents were physical assaults. 330 were vandalism. So vandalism could be drawing a swastika somewhere, could be breaking a window, could be shooting, at a synagogue, at a shul. 749 of the incidents were verbal or written harassment. So that's the vast majority. That's at a rally, that's at, a Jewish student, that's at somebody just walking on the street and somebody yells something at them. We found that 250 incidents specifically targeted Jewish institutions, which I think maybe the first time we've ever looked into that number. So that basically means synagogues, Hillels, Chabads, maybe a cemetery. So those are people who are intentionally targeting a Jewish institution because they're Jewish as a stand-in for Israel. And then there were also, and this isn't necessarily anti-Semitism, but there were 905 anti-Israel rallies that we found across the country. Some of those included anti-Semitic rhetoric or expressions for terrorism or violence against Israel. So it's a lot of information. It paints in some ways a representative yet skewed perspective on what's going on. What I mean by that is that, again, even though there were 400 incidents recorded on college campuses, that doesn't necessarily mean that all our, colleges experience the same levels of anti-Semitism. Like to Rabbi Marder's point, some universities are better than others. Some are addressing the issues better than others. But it's clearly a problem that is affecting the universities across the country writ large, and is something that we haven't at least seen since we started compiling these statistics, which date back to the 1970s. So it really is an unprecedented number overall.
Can I add some statistics?
Yeah.
Not ADL statistics, just to flesh it out a little bit more. So using FBI hate crime statistics for a moment, they've been on the rise. Anti-Semitic hate crimes have been on the rise since 2014. So this is a continuation. It's gone up quite a bit more. To Shaya's point about breaking it down, the violent crimes have really started to spike in 2018. We're familiar with Pittsburgh, Poway, Jersey City, and other places. But Jews have been per capita targeted more than Blacks, more than LGBT, more than Muslims, more than any other group consistently since the year 2000. So it's not new that Jews are the most targeted. It's not discussed a lot, but that's one group of statistics. The other one I would use is Amcha Initiative, which is another organization that compiles a lot of statistics on the topic. There are roughly 250 SJP or JVP chapters in universities around the country. Those institutions, those schools that have an SJP or JVP chapter are 5.2 more likely to have anti-Semitic incidents than those without it. So while historically we've all wanted to find those Hillel and OU, JLIC and different institutions to have a good Jewish campus life, when you look at those places that have SJP and JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace, you're much more likely to have anti-Semitic incidents on your campuses.
And I think people are also less aware. I think that actually addresses one of these questions of what can you be looking for when choosing, right, when selecting schools. And there are a lot of schools, or a bunch of schools, I should say, that have actually either temporarily or permanently stopped, right? SJP is no longer like an approved sanctions university group on a variety of different campuses, ranging from GW to Columbia, Brandeis out loud entirely. So I think there's some of that people don't, again, that nuance, right? I actually authored with the help from the templates on the ADL's website, and a colleague from Frisch, like a letter to all the 50 college presidents at the beginning of this on behalf of all Jewish day school college counselors, and we all read it and signed off. And one of the requests with sort of the asks in there was to sort of explain, like, SJP feels like a particularly violence inciting group. And we were seeing in some of the responses, of which we got very few, but some of the responses of schools saying, actually, yeah, SJP, like for the next 90 days can't do anything or permanently can't do anything. Like there is a distinction between, right, like there is with everything else, but I think there is a distinction of understanding these specific groups that, again, a lot of our high school students have not been exposed to, that are somewhat more, tend a little more toward violence, I would say, frankly, than others. So I think that's important to keep in mind. And actually, Michah, maybe you could speak a little bit to this, but there's a couple of questions here that are kind of similar in the idea of what efforts you've seen or could be seeing on campuses at the administrative level, the faculty level, to really like engage and encourage students to engage and educate and encourage students to be talking about this in a productive sort of way, and what suggested curricular or constructive conversation formats are sort of available to students. You spoke to it a little bit already about NYU, but if you can give us a little bit more of a sense of the insider conversations you've been on.
Yeah, sure. So the president of NYU came to speak with the Jewish faculty, had a meeting. The president of NYU also then sent the provost, who's the chief academic officer, to come to one of our faculty meetings. And, I mean, NYU is huge. It's, 20, 30,000 undergrad, hundreds, departments, and to send to our little department was, I think, an important statement. And yeah, I mean, I mentioned the Center for the Study of Anti-Semitism. Again, it came from a donation, it's a 7-figure donation, and we have 4 of our faculty members who are on the advisory committee. And this is, really going to be, the president, Linda Mills, is very committed to that. She's been committed to countering anti-Semitism for a long time. I should just mention, Linda Mills, who's the president, started in September. She's a very well-known quantity. She rose through the administration. She wasn't a president who was selected from the outside. I had dealings with her, maybe 9 years ago, when I was the global coordinator for NYU Tel Aviv. So NYU has all these kind of study abroad campuses, and it has also full NYU campuses in Beijing and Abu Dhabi, and then it has about a dozen or so campuses all around the world. And Linda Mills, again, I was kind of a global coordinator for the Tel Aviv campus, and Linda Mills, I remember she was the head of global affairs at NYU back 2014, 2015, and she's very supportive of NYU Tel Aviv. Now, NYU Tel Aviv has, one thing that you find from SJP and other groups, and even a department in NYU, which is really kind of a department that's really kind of political activism, it's social and cultural analysis. If you see their mandate, it's hard to see that it's really even academic. And it's for years been saying they were going to boycott NYU Tel Aviv. They have non-cooperation with NYU Tel Aviv. One of the rallies in the library, there was a whole banner that said boycott NYU Tel Aviv. It's been kind of terrible. They've just kind of spreading lies about NYU Tel Aviv. And but Linda Mills is very, very strongly supportive of NYU Tel Aviv. So in terms of, I mentioned some of the kind of educational projects that they're trying to deal with in terms of to educate the students. And they have, projects to create a curriculum in the dorms. They've also, there's been all these kind of illegal protests, because they have rules about where you could protest. And the students sometimes kind of occupy a building, or they occupy the library, or they occupy the student center, which is completely against the NYU rules. So what the administration has been doing is that when they see that there are going to be these protests, they kind of block off the area. So they've been kind of working in advance to stop the protest from happening. So they were supposed to have this big protest in the mall in front of the Stern Business School, and then we just set up these barricades and wouldn't let them do it. So, you know, again, I think the administration is, you know, is very sensitive to these issues. There's been also this lawsuit, as you may have known, charging NYU with anti-Semitism. That actually is very complicated how NYU reacts to that, because on the one hand, you know, they become very aware of this sensitivity, but also they have a vested interest in showing that there isn't anti-Semitism at NYU. So they were having all these listening sessions about anti-Semitism, and after the lawsuit hit, they canceled them. So again, the effect of things, they have to be thought out very carefully about, you know, what effect things happen. Again, I think pressure can be good when it's directed in the right way, but you also have to think about the particular pressure that's being exerted and what are going to be the fallout from that. And the last thing I'd say is that, yes, I found them to be, you know, very, very receptive. When the provost came to our department, she said, what could we be doing? What could we be doing better? And I said, look, for years, we've had these dean's lectures about, you know, racism and systemic racism. And, you know, that shows the message of where the administration is at and what they value. And I said, we need to have lectures like that about anti-Semitism, and people should be aware and realize that the administration really cares about this, and people should be thinking and aware of, is what I'm saying anti-Semitic, right? And that should be in the consciousness of the students. And she said, that's a great idea. We'll see if it happens. But, you know, but I found them to be open, and especially work well when you give them constructive suggestions for.
Thank you. That was very helpful, very informative. Somebody submitted the question, do you feel safe wearing a kippah on campus? I'm gonna, just in the interest of time, take that quickly to say it seems to me like the four of you are the kippah or the equivalent of the red Jewish star. It sounds like you all are. There are plenty of students who are not, right? I think that's a tough, like, I think that's kind of where we stand on that. Yeah. Okay. Can you, Yadid, it sounds like maybe from somebody in the audience who knows you well, that you maybe have a connection to a close friend who goes to Columbia. Can you maybe share anything about, if you feel comfortable, would you like to share some of their experiences? Or any of you who have close friends on any other college campus?
Yeah. A loved one of mine goes to Columbia, like JTS, dual degree, whatever, all that jazz. And her experience.
It's a great program. Don't all that jazz.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's really amazing. It's a lot more difficult than Binghamton has been. Not just in anti-Semitism, but also academically. And in her experience, it's been very difficult because, like, she's, let's say, going to like practice for like production in theater, and then the building is blocked off by a bunch of people like yelling like Free Palestine. And there was a really interesting thing that happened recently where they had like a campus-wide tree lighting, and I want to say like 100 students came out and were like, joy is canceled. And it was this really interesting contrast between, you have like Jewish students actually coming out for like a not super Jewish practice just because they wanted this like moment of unity. And they wanted this like warm, not just because it's cold outside, but also because like it's really like isolating and lonely being on a campus where like not only is it like it's in the city, but also like there's a ton of anti-Semitism in that area. And then having people just being like yelling and screaming and saying like, no, you can't have this small moment of peace. I think that given that there are like really good support systems that exist in these communities, like you have like Hillel, the craft center is incredible at Columbia. But there's only so much they can do. And in a campus, like I think there's a big contrast where like for me, my experience has been like very, very, very peaceful. And like there's been minimal yelling and screaming, whereas for her, it's like an everyday occurrence. And she like actually has to redesign how she walks to classes now so that she avoids these giant groups of people. And in having a lot of conversations with her about this, there's like this stark contrast for us between experiences, which makes me a lot more grateful, thank God, of all of like the limited amount of anti-Semitism that I face on campus, but also like wondering how I have a responsibility towards students, like friends of mine, and also people that I just like know of or have heard of or don't know at other campuses to like help them like in these experiences.
Thanks. That's actually a really helpful perspective.
I know.
Really depressing perspective, but a really helpful perspective to have. This is an interesting one for any of the students who are interested in taking it. If you did take a gap year in Israel, how did that, the question is, how did that prepare you better for this moment? Not sure if it did or didn't, but yes.
So I think it's a matter of, I don't remember who was talking about this before, but I think it might have been Michah, of education and the education that people have. And I think that taking a gap year has given me a lot of perspective, and it means that I can transfer that to people that I'm speaking with. So I don't know, there are two experiences that come to mind that are really quick. I was, I think a week after this started, if we remember, like the Hamas Day of Violence that was going to happen. I was in my dorm room at night, and I was going to the bathroom, and in the bathroom with these kids who were talking, and they're talking to each other, and they're like, "Hey, did you hear about the Hummus Day of Violence tomorrow?" And I'm just sitting in the bathroom, just like, I don't even know what to say to this. I don't know if I'm supposed to like respond, right? Where do we even begin? And like, they weren't talking to me, but like they were just talking to each other, and they're talking about this Hummus Day of Violence. And I'm like, if only we just stood and threw chickpeas at each other, that'd be really nice. But like, you know, and they start having this conversation about it, and whatever. One of the guys is from Pakistan, and he's like, you know, I think there's people on both sides of the issue. And then another guy's like, yeah, but like if someone came out and said that India was right in everything they did to Pakistan, I'd stand on your behalf, and like whatever. It was this interesting conversation that was happening. And it's just like, that's more of a funny story, but it kind of shows that like there's a lot of difference in where people are coming from with what they, you know, even know. And I guess a better story to kind of show that is that I was one of the first people that I spoke to for dialogue. He was really well intentioned, and he's actually a good friend of mine now. But he was an example of somebody who was interested and wanted to go find sources. And so we're having this conversation, and first he, you know, starts the sentence. He goes, so in the Golan Heights, the West Bank, and in Gaza. And I'm like, I'm going to stop you right there. I don't know the end of the sentence, but whatever it is, it's wrong. Because like just real quick, I need to give you some history, right? And I said to him, like, I don't know what you're reading, and I'm not going to tell you that you know, I'm really very rarely going to say like, oh, your facts are wrong, my facts are right. When it comes to this, there is no the Golan Heights, the West Bank, and Gaza. First of all, geographically, boom, boom, boom. Second of all, legally, right? And I kind of went over it with him, and he was like, okay, you're right. That's not what I knew. That's not what I heard. And like, that makes a lot more sense, right? And later in the conversation, he brought up this thing where he said like, oh, I heard that at the beginning of this whole conflict, Qatar had brokered a peace where Hamas said they would release all the hostages in return for 33 women and children who were being held in Israel, right? And I said, again, like, I don't know where you heard that, and I can't tell you for a fact that is factually incorrect. But what I can tell you is that my ex-girlfriend is a criminal investigator in Israel. We were talking yesterday, and she told me that Israel just released 3,300 women and children that were being held for free. They didn't get anything in return, because Israel had nothing to do with them, right? So the fact that they did that probably tells me that they would have been willing to release 33, right? And I know that because of my gap year, because I have these connections, because I have so many friends in the army. And I said, and on top of that, like, I'll give you a little perspective. The reason why Israel would say no to some kind of hostage deal is because of this, you know, story, this guy called Gilad Shalit. You've probably never heard of it. And I told him the story, and I said, you know, being a yeshiva kid in America, I was like, oh, yay, they got him back, right? And then I went to Israel, and everyone there kind of hates him. And like they're embarrassed by him. They say, you know, it's his fault, and he's kind of an embarrassment to Israel. And they have a collective trauma about this story, which means that they're very reluctant. You know, Israel in general is very reluctant to take any kind of prisoner exchange deal, because a lot of people know people that died from the prisoners that were exchanged for Gilad Shalit's return, right? And so I can, because of my gap year and because of my knowledge of, you know, the people that I know and people I can reach out to, and the, you know, the education I've had before and during my time in Israel, I can kind of come to these conversations and say, I might not have better information than you, I might not have better facts than you, but I have a perspective. And where you see it this way, I can tell you that I see it this way, and maybe we can come to a place where we both kind of understand each other a little bit better. And so I think that has been really helpful for me.
Can I just jump in on the education element? Because I think there's several Jewish educators in this room. So I do a fair amount of presenting and speaking on like kind of Israel 101, history of Zionism. And what I find pretty consistent across the board, and that's not every single college age or post-college student, is that Jews do not know their own basic history, especially when it comes to Zionism. And when they come to college campuses and all of a sudden are told things like Zionism, racism, Israel's a settler colonialist state, etc., many of them don't know how to respond because they don't have enough information based on their own education. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges that the Jewish education system is facing in the moment, the high school in particular, is being able to equip and educate high school students on the issues on their own history. And I'm not saying that every single Jewish college student needs to be a warrior for Israel, but if you're confronted with some very basic accusations, you should feel comfortable, if you want to, responding to them. And I think that a large percentage of Jewish students don't, and it's a big problem, unfortunately. I think these four may be somewhat of the exceptions to the rule, or Shai, like spending time in Israel is very helpful, but I think for many Jewish students, that's unfortunately not necessarily the case.
Do Ms. Wolf or Ms. Schultzen want to speak to that for a moment? No pressure, but
Wait, Nicola just asked the question.
yes.
I said, is that the same for day school kids? I feel like my kids at Christian SAR have like gotten both history of Israel in their history classes, but then like Yona did a piece, we graduated on how to advocate for Israel. Now, he actually found it lacking, thought that there was that advocacy, not as much like a, he found it one-sided. I want to be careful how I say that, but he found it was, while a ton, he felt like we had a very rich discussion on the issue. But I guess the question is, are you speaking to day school kids as well, when you say kids across the board?
So I think it's both. I think certainly there are kids who go to public school and have a very rich at-home Jewish Zionist education. There are kids who go to day school and their day school either doesn't do such a good job or they themselves are not great students. But I think that at least until recently, and maybe this is changing within the system, there's a lot of schools will teach Ahavat Yisrael, they'll teach love of Israel, and they'll teach like a little bit of the history, but the accusations being thrown out, especially on college campuses, are very somewhat technical and speak more to the sort of political aspects of Zionism and Jewish history. And I think that is not, I'm not saying that in every school it's way, but that's not necessarily being educated on in high schools. And Adina,
It's just like, to your point.
Yeah.
We were working at SAR for years and we could always be better, but we only now talk to our kids about what the accusation of settler colonialism is specifically, and what our response is specifically to that. We never did that before, even though, of course, we talked about Jews having the right to Israel going back, and we talked about a lot of the things, but we never put it together in that context before.
Right.
And now.
No, because now you're confronted with it for the first time.
Out there specifically, but I know there were kids,
So I just want to add that for many years, at least since 2015, we have felt very strongly about teaching a nuanced curriculum about Israel. We didn't stress the utilitarian nature of that. I think it was important because you can't love your country fully if you don't understand the full story. And we sort of came at it with that perspective. And I for sure have said out loud to my seniors, you are not a soldier going to war when you go to college. Go be a student. And if you are presented with an opportunity to talk about Israel here, we really hope you have the knowledge and tools to now do that. But we're kind of switching our tune this year, or we're in the middle of assessing what to do actually with the seniors. And we do need to be much more specific about those accusations, about how we're doing what we're teaching. It's also complicated in the fact that we moved a lot of these conversations to 10th grade. Because seniors tend to be checked out. And I'm going to walk into my senior class this year and say, you have a responsibility right now in the next 3 months to pay attention. And don't walk out of here and say, we didn't give you this knowledge. We're giving it to you. It's hard, it's really hard.
I just want to add one more very quick thing. It's very important to teach the Israeli perspective, but you also have to teach the Palestinian perspective on the narrative. And maybe the schools do this, maybe they don't, but taking groups of high schoolers to Israel is amazing and important, but if you don't spend time in the West Bank, if you don't spend time talking to Palestinians, you're missing a huge opportunity. Not talking about indoctrination, but they need to understand that there's 7-8 million Palestinians between Gaza and West Bank and Israel who have their own narrative about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And that's going to be something that's going to come up in their college experience.
We are definitely doing that, and they've been doing it, but not enough schools.
Yes, Rena.
Sorry, I'm itching over here because I'm coming from two perspectives, which is first of all, I work at the South now, and we get dozens and dozens and dozens of letters every year from college, from LaSalle alumni thanking us for feeling prepared on college campus. But to Shaya's point, we're talking about hanging fire the fire. Like that's not receiving education. I mean, yes, special in day school, but I work with a ton of college professionals and they're terrified for the kids who really are coming in without that and without even the basic education. So to me, that's the biggest question.
And then organizations like StandWithUs.
Exactly. So first to the SAR, I went to a TICFA conference. They had 5 students who are now in college and
If
grad
you don't
school.
mind, let's take away this. I know that we are a community and we send, right, in this room, we probably have 3 or 4 schools or most of us send our children, but let's
Yes.
maybe veer away from targeting specific, like from speaking to specific schools and just the general opportunity.
I was just going to share that in this small group, all of the people who stood on the podium to address anti-Semitism were all day school. So 5 of them, 2 of them happened to be an SAR in an audience. So StandWithUs, a lot of what they're addressing is exactly in the public schools. Kids who have come from public schools who don't have anything. So in addition to the Chabad and OUJLIC, things on campus, there are organizations that are supplemental.
Yes.
SSI, Students Supporting Israel, Jews on Campus. There are all these organizations, StandWithUs, who work to help augment what's going on on college campuses, but they also are addressing education in public schools for high school kids. So when they get there, because it's definitely true, the kids who are in public school don't even have that. Not only do they not have the education in their schools, more importantly, or as importantly, the parent body is very different. So however much these 4 students are awesome because they went to Jewish day schools, they're awesome because of their parents. And their parents who instill particular values and education around the Shabbos table and model things to them. The kids who, not all, but a lot of kids who go to public school, not only do they not have the education where the kids have brought up and their parents aren't necessarily taking them to Israel, teaching them about Judaism. It's very hard for those students, no question.
Yes, Chuck.
So just want to add, with all the respect in the world to my SAR education, because I really loved going there and I gained so much from being there. The specific tools that I'm talking about that I have now, in the conversations that I'm having, the perspectives that I'm bringing, are actually not what SAR gave me. And SAR gave me a lot of things which helped me a lot in Israel. Because when I went there, I was in a mechana with a lot of Israelis, and I had a lot of conversations that I could use my SAR given knowledge to back me up then. But I feel like the conversations that I'm having now, I'm actually much more using the information that I gained during my year in Israel. And I don't know if that's a day school thing in general, right? I'm trying to not, I only went to SAR, so I don't know. But
You also did a gap year that's unique among.
I also did a gap year that's
in those
unique.
schools, like
Yes,
most people
true.
many people are going to a yeshiva or a seminary where
Right.
they're getting almost none of this. So
Right. So I just know that a lot of the tools that I'm using now are because I did all of these things, right? In my program, I went everywhere. I was at the Gaza wall. I mean, it's a crazy story, but like, you know, I looked up and the guy, on the other side of the Gaza wall, there's a sentry tower and somebody's pointing a sniper at me. Like, you know, I have those stories that I can point back to, and I have the people that I know from being in Israel, and that's what I'm using now. And, you know, I had Dr. Schwartz for Modern Israel, and she actually very much emphasized, like, here's the utilitarian view, right? Here's what we're going to, here's what you should say, here's what we're going to talk about. And that's not what I'm using. And it's what I used last year, but what I'm using now is really like, we heard from, you know, politicians, and they said, here's what we think about the Golan Heights, here's what we think about the West Bank. And like, I'm using the information that I learned then. And I think that maybe, and this might just be because of my, you know, unique journey that I took, I think that maybe the focus should be shifted a little bit from thinking that everything needs to be done in high school to maybe there's, I mean, like Lawrence was saying, you know, with parents and with outside of high school, I think it can be very, very helpful to have experiences outside of high school that give you that perspective. And I don't know how to not enforce that, but I don't know how to make that more universal, because I'm not saying that everybody needs to go through the same program, but for me specifically, I really didn't get what I'm using now from my day school education.
And some of this is also, again, you are students who have like taken on responsibility for this in some ways and are very well educated. I think a lot of high school is also learning how to learn and gain information and pull those things together, so that as you grow older, right, not always as a second semester senior, you're going to sit and be like, okay, right, for certain kids, that's going to really resonate. And sometimes it's not. And I think some of it is lived experience and some of it is also growing up, right? And understanding that if you're gonna take responsibility for this, pick your news sources, pick them well, reach back out to your teachers. They're happy to provide resources, but there's also a next layer here. So it's, but it's a helpful thing to be thinking about. I think in a room like this, where we all are sort of bought in some sense, right? Like to remember that and to really be thinking, and I know I can speak, again, we could, three of us happen to be able to speak to one institution, Rita can speak to another, a lot of us can speak to a variety of institutions, but that I think that's happening. I think that I'm feeling, again, from like a bad spot, right? Like that this comes out of like a tough necessity moment sort of, but I am feeling in the ways that I'm feeling hopeful about this in some ways is that I think that this is something that we will gain and that will have some long-term impact on how we teach this, how we gain, or sort of have these conversations, what the day-to-day even school experience looks like, right? The school-wide Michah that we have once a week that we didn't have beforehand. I don't think that's going away anytime soon. So there's a lot of those aspects, I think, that this will have an impact on the longer term of how our students are educated, what they're educated with, and educating them and how to educate themselves. There's a lot to happen here. In the interest of time, I'm gonna say, I think we're gonna stop here, but I know that everybody will be, if it's okay, I could say that we will all sort of mill around for a couple more minutes and are all, again, congregants here, so feel free to chat with us anytime. I will say I feel so grateful to all of you for being here, for listening to us. You are all incredible. It was an honor and privilege to be up here on this panel with all of you. And just really grateful to Rabbi Martyr and to all the organizers and to Rabbi Tara and to please rise so we can, but thank you, and to Rebecca and to everybody who organized this and put this together. It's an important, this is such an important, like, physical and increasingly like emotional, mental space for all of us in this building, and it's really like empowering to be able to come here together like this on a Sunday. So I thank all of you, and I thank all of you, and I hope we are here for more talks.
Thank you for moderating.